This webinar is on public-private partnership, China, California, and L zero emission vehicle policy. Very happy that you all are here. Let's get the main screen. Very happy that you all are here. We have an interesting set of speakers. We kept it quite informally, so this is the first session we do as a normal Zoom. That means, of course, that please all stay muted, and when you want to speak, then we give you the floor. Otherwise, of course, it would be a bit difficult. But the good thing about this informal Zoom session is that everybody can be in the picture and ask a question later on in the question answer session at the end or after each speaker. First, maybe I go quickly over the speakers, and then you tell a little bit more about them later on. First, Gerben Passier, then he will open. Then Michiel Strijland from APPM will speak. Then Tyson Eckerle from Gobis, California will speak. And then Yunxi Wang from UC Davis will speak. And afterwards, we have a special Q&A session, not only Q&A from the participants, but also 4 interventions and statements from specialists in this field. So they're coming and they will be introduced by Gerben later on. So really looking forward to this session. Please ask your questions on the Zoom group chat. We will monitor them, and we will come back after the relevant add in the relevant questions after each speaker, and at the end, of course, during the Q&A session. So we have quite some time. So I think this will be a good deep dive in the ZEV PPP policy topic. So I would love to give the floor now to Gerben. Gerben is a Senior Advisor Sustainability Mobility at ENW, so that's the Dutch Ministry for Infrastructure and Water. And please, Gerben, please take the floor. And
thank you, Walter, and welcome to everyone on this Friday morning in California and Friday afternoon here. It's been a very interesting week. We did many webinars where we participated ourselves and listened. So I'm looking forward to one more and have discussions with you all. So I'll give a short introduction on what we have been doing and a little bit looking ahead, and then giving you some background of where this topic and this webinar is about. So please show the next slide in the main view. Yeah. So I would like to start to just show you how important China is for the zero emission market. So you see here a graph of the total zero emission vehicle sales, electric sales up to 2018, and I added the one for 19, and it's a bit small. But the overall message remaining the same, that roughly 50% of all electric vehicles coming from China. And the same goes for the sales. So this is why some years ago we decided that we should try to work more with China. So if you look at the next slide, we, as a Netherlands, together with California, we started a coalition, an alliance of frontrunners called the International Zero Emission Vehicle Alliance. And in 2018, we decided that we should try to get China joining us. So instead of directly joining, we did the intermediate step of working together in the ZEV Policy Lab together with California, China, and ourselves. And our objective was to have a series of workshops to talk about policy and best practices in that respect, and also see if we could move on to economic cooperation. So in the last year, we had about 3 workshops, and in the next slide, I'm just showing you the workshop that we had last week with government only, talking about policy best practices. And we did that based on a report made by APPM about comparing the city of Shenzhen in China, California, and the Netherlands policies. And today we will have that presentation first from APPM, followed by a business perspective from California, and then a China perspective of Yunxi. And if you can go one slide back first, then I would like to say what our objective is today. That is, how can public-private partnerships like the Coast to Coast program that California and the Netherlands have support the acceleration of zero-emission vehicle uptake? And we also look ahead at the EVS 34 next year, which will be held in China. So I think it's particularly relevant to look at these three regions. So that brings me to introducing the next speaker, which is Michiel Strijland from APPM. Last week we had his colleague presenting, but I think it's very nice, Michiel, that you are here to present, as you are based in San Francisco. So no one could be better tell us about this study than you. Please take the floor, go ahead and take us to the comparison of the three frontrunner regions in zero emission vehicles.
All right, thank you very much for that introduction. So my name is Michiel Strijland. Annabel van Zanten is also in this call at this moment. And we're going to tell you a little bit about the study we have done. And at the end, we'll give you the opportunity to ask any questions you have. First, a little bit about APPM. We are a consulting firm focused on mobility, and we have the goal to shift to smart and zero emission mobility, to help cities in their shift, to save the environment, and to keep these cities livable. To do this, we have developed three types of products: cross-border networks designed for knowledge sharing, developing strategies based on data, modeling, and expertise, and also the introduction of new technologies with public-private partnerships. But enough about us. We're going to talk about the report today. And the goal of the report was that there are very different approaches to achieve sustainable transport. Various countries and regions are on the forefront, and we want to determine what their success factors were. On the right side, you see the theoretical model we have developed. And as you see, we define three types of policy measures: government leadership, which is the way targets are set for by the government, for example, fleets, and infrastructure. And we looked on a national, regional, and local level. On a national level, we looked at the Netherlands, regional, California, local, Shenzhen. Those three are all front runners globally, and we wanted to see what their policies were and which policies were working. We also made subcategories for passenger cars, freight and logistics, and ports. And we did the study through desk research and expert opinions on these topics. To give you a little bit of context, this is the Netherlands, 70 million inhabitants, around 200,000 electric vehicles at the moment. And what is really cool about the Netherlands is that they have one of the world's densest charging networks. And with that dense charging network, they also have a really high interoperability. So there's a lot of data sharing, and it's very easy to pay with a single payment system. So this is California, where I'm located at the dot. Around 700,000 electric vehicles. And what you see is that the EV uptake is much faster here than anywhere in the United States. Currently, 50% of all EVs drive around in the United States, drive around in California. And they also have quite a developed charging network at this moment. Then Shenzhen, around 100,000 electric vehicles. And a real something that stood out to us is their targeted approach to buses and taxis, which are almost all electric at the moment, and the relatively high number of DC chargers, thanks to special DC fast chargers, thanks to special subsidies. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a look at the ambitions and the policies of the different front runners. There are many bullets on my slides. I'm not going to discuss them all. I'm going to discuss the ones that stood out to us. We start with the Netherlands, with their ambitions. In the Netherlands, there's the goal that in 2030, all new cars sold are zero emission. And there are many zones in different cities for zero emission distribution. 30 to 40 cities at the moment. They have the goal that they want zero emission zones by 2025. And that number is actually increasing quite rapidly, giving a real market push for companies to change. Also, the Port of Rotterdam has some interesting policies and there are the CO2 reduction goals to reach the Paris agreements. Some key policies. At the background, you might hear the garbage being picked up. I hope you can all hear me correctly. Key policies for the Netherlands. What is really interesting, the Netherlands is a real patchwork of different municipalities, cities, organizations, and they don't have the market power by themselves to actually make a good deal with manufacturers of charging infrastructure. So what they do in the Netherlands is they bundle their strength and they make a long-term planning and use that for smart procurement, bringing prices significantly down, making investment way easier to return on themselves. That's really a feature of the Dutch market. Also, there are some interesting co-financing subsidies for zero-emission logistics and charging infrastructure. And for example, also favorable delivery windows for zero-emission logistics. When we look at California, the major goals are that by 2025, there need to be 250,000 EV charging stations, and by 2030, 5 million zero-emission vehicles on the road. What is kind of unique for the region is that they have a strong focus on electric trucks. So there's a mandate that there should be 300,000 electric trucks on the road by 2035. And there are also some interesting policies about airport shuttle fleets, public transit agencies, and the Port of Los Angeles is also quite ambitious, which is actually the biggest port in the United States. Policies in California. The zero-emission vehicle mandate is perhaps the most well-known. The mandate for car manufacturers to sell a certain amount of electric vehicles, and this amount increases over the years. For me, coming to San Francisco from the Netherlands, I found it really interesting the way that they handle public information campaigns. There are a lot of them, and they really help spread the word, spread the message, and build a coalition for zero-emission vehicles. Also, you have the right to charge in California, which means that at multi-unit dwellings, you have the right to install charging infrastructure. So when we look at Shenzhen, here's also a strong push to cut CO2 emissions. But also for ports, and they were they had their eyes on the ports quite early. Well, that is something that in the other areas is starting to happen right now. There was already a push, there were already goals for 2020. All ride-hailing services must use EV fleets, and with the Made in China 2025, there's a strong push for domestic car makers to sell electric vehicles. Some key policies from Shenzhen. There is a license plate quota system. So if you want to get a new license plate, it's easier when you have an electric vehicle, or sometimes the only way to get a new license plate. Also, subsidies that are based on technical eligibility and requirements, meaning that the subsidies only go to cars who have certain range and reach certain targets, but also only go to cars that are actually driven around. What we have done, we've looked at the policies that we found the most interesting, that we thought had the biggest impact, and we tried to see if they would fit in other regions. So, for example, the smart procurement strategy from the Netherlands, where with a long-term strategy, more market power and working together, a bigger market power brings down the investment cost for charging infrastructure. We think that that could be really work in California. As we have heard this week a few times already, California has quite a patchwork as well of different municipalities, cities, transport agencies. And by working together, we think they can bring down prices really fast. And then the California public information campaigns, we think they can play a role in the Netherlands, as they, well, there's some critique in the Netherlands that electric vehicles are really for the rich. By educating the people and helping them in the transition to electric vehicles, like they do in California, that can have a real impact. The zero electric vehicle mandate from California, we think can also be very interesting for Shenzhen, as there's a car industry there, which can really help push the market. And the operational subsidy standards we see in Shenzhen are then again really interesting for the Netherlands, combining the subsidies with the use case and the using of the car. So these are our thoughts at the topic. Like I said, Annabelle is also in the call, and we would love to answer any questions you have.
Yes, thanks very much, Michiel. Great. We can also, of course, talk about APPM a little bit later on during the Q&A.
Sure.
That's fine as well. Maybe people will gather their thoughts. I'm very happy now to introduce Tyson Eckerle from the GOBIS, so California government. So he serves as the Deputy Director of Zero Emission Vehicle Market Development in the Governor's Office, GOBIS. And yeah, he's a good friend of ours. We have been working very well together with California the last week, because we had the Lieutenant Governor at the opening, we had Commissioner Moynihan at the policy dialogue before that. We had your colleagues at matchmaking sessions from Energy and from GOBIS. And you yourself, you are also involved not only in this webinar, but also in 2 other webinars, if I'm correct. So we are very happy that you also wanted to do this one, and then you can share your knowledge and the insights from the California government. So Tyson, please go ahead. Looking forward to your talk.
Thank you very much for the introduction. And hold on one second. I'm having, of course, this worked in the trial run. And then give me 1 second here. Okay, well, while I'm setting this up, here we go. Get to that. Okay, that should be good. Thank you. So yeah, definitely very excited to be here, and thanks. That's a great, Michaela, is an excellent overview of all the policy things. I think we're always excited to join in these because there's so much to learn from each other in this, and there's differences across the markets, but a lot of similarities. And so I wanted to talk just a little bit of kind of where we are in California and where we're going. And we're thinking about this really in the context of under Governor Newsom, it's California for all, and for the zero emission program, it's zero emissions for all. And so we're thinking about this in a way of clean mobility, but also clean air for everybody. So those the benefits are transferred, not just to the drivers of zero emission vehicles, but across the basin. And so yeah, that's kind of our underlying frame. And I wanted to talk a little bit of kind of like what our core strength and foundation comes from, right? And so it really historically has come from the idea of health, right? So California suffers from some of the worst air quality in the nation, and our population acknowledges that and knows that, and we know we need to clean our air. And so we've had longstanding policies that are organized around health, but it's it's more from not just health in our lungs, but also health of the economy. Now the zero emission market and electric vehicle market is really growing within California. It's becoming a big economic driver. But built on top of that health is really those zero emission vehicle regulations, as Mikhail mentioned. Those really help compel investment. So on the traditional industries, there's that drives their investment into the vehicles and stations and services. But I think we're seeing big benefits is really enabling investment. Giving that foundation for investors for disruptors to come in. And the perfect example of a great disruptor is Tesla, who's right in they're manufacturing other cars in Fremont, soon to be in China now too. But they've had great success, with a lot of from the support from zero emission, from the mandate and from the credits that are generated there to help get off the ground. And even just last quarter, the Model 3 was the #1 selling car in California, which is really, really exciting. So if you look so we have the ZEV regulations as a foundation, but then I think our secret sauce in California, I think a lot of us do this really well, is kind of all those wraparound policies, right? So you have public investment that's coming in, supporting vehicle purchases, supporting station development, workforce, manufacturing. We have a bunch of people in California who work focused on barriers and kind of making sure that permitting and stuff is taken out. We have the consumer awareness campaigns, which there's always more to do in there. We're always surprised at how few people, relatively speaking, are as excited about ZEVs as those of us on this call. we have, academia and Yunqi's here to help, and then a bunch of supportive policies, and we went over those a bit, but like building codes, HOV lanes. And that's kind of the secret sauce that goes there. And to date, I think the system's really worked. Like as we said, we have over 700,000 ZEVs and 48 models on the market here in California. Our goal is to get to 5 million. We have over 50,000 chargers, and our goal is to get to 250,000. We have 41 hydrogen stations, and then we're affectionately calling the big ZEV. The medium and heavy duty. That market is growing. In process. June 25th is when.
Hey, Tyson?
Yeah.
Excuse me. We have a little problem with your audio, so maybe I think it's your headset, but I'm
Let me try it.
100% sure. You.
How's this? Is this better?
Better, yeah. You're fading in and out. This is better, yeah. It was not consistent, the volume. Perfect.
Okay.
This is better. Yeah.
Did you hear anything I said? Should I start over?
No. We heard, let's say 75% or more, so.
Okay. Well, good thing I had some slides. So the bottom line is the system's been working, but really it's been working in the context of, can we build this market? So when we had Governor Brown in office, from 2010 to 2018, I think the core question, and going back before that, was, can we make the zero emission market work? The answer is a clear and resounding yes. And now under the current administration, this current time frame, it's less to do with the governors, more to do with the time frame, but it's really, can we make the ZEV market scale? Scale in time to meet air quality and greenhouse gas needs. And so if you think about scale, that's really where we're starting to look into private finance, right? So we've compelled investment from traditional automakers, from disruptive automakers, but it's really that bringing in that third leg of the stool as far as the private investment coming in to help accelerate the market. And so this talk is we're focusing about public-private partnerships, and we're thinking about, okay, how do we organize that? And we have a lot of actors in California who have a lot to offer, ranging from our state agencies to local governments, to industry, to NGOs. And so I put this up here because it's just a framework for what we're thinking. So we have this market development framework that we're working on, where we'll have a high-level plan that kind of sets the direction and what we expect from each of these parties and need from each of these parties. And then really get into the details, with the people who would be attending this webinar, and that's kind of where the living website will go. But the idea here is to organize the multiple actors. Let's see here. And then, so can you guys still hear me okay? There we go. So so within that plan, we're thinking we really got to focus in on measuring what matters, and we're establishing some key guiding metrics and stuff that we've been working on, but we're also just putting it front and center. So we have, air quality is incredibly important. We have access, and there's a lot of, a lot to learn from each other as far as getting this mobility access into all the populations of California. I think that perception that was mentioned about the Netherlands, that the zero emission vehicles are for wealthy people, is something we have to work on as well. We have the greenhouse gas emissions. We're trying to make sure that our workforce is growing in this area, that the market is growing, and this really looking at vehicles and stations, which are pretty easy to track. And then the third one is market expansion. Number 6 is market expansion, and really getting into all vehicle segments. So it's from passenger vehicles up to medium and heavy duty. If you excuse me, just one second here. There's a lawnmower right outside my window, and so I'm gonna shut those real quick.
Of surprises. It's okay. We didn't hear the lawnmower really, so thanks.
Okay. Sorry, the joys of doing this from home. So I wanted to, look at that last one with the private investment. And we've been tracking this, and I think this is, initial work here, but the investment in the charging station network is growing, right? So we have on the top level, we've estimated private investment, that's the purple line. We have Tesla as a big contributor. This is in the charging station network, that's the gray. And then you start to look, the stuff that's below that is kind of public policy driven. And so we're starting to see what we need to see in terms of private investment coming into the market. And that's just kind of what this is. You know, so really, the private investment is starting to grow exponentially, and so that's what we're trying to help facilitate. And then, just one other thing that Mikhail, you know, the APPN, they mentioned the diversity of the, you know, governments and stuff across California. One of the areas we've been really focusing on is trying to get permitting for these stations done. And so if you look at, we've been going through and doing a deep dive on our state. We have 540 different jurisdictions, each with their own ordinances and governance, and we're trying to work with them to go. So we have a lot of work to do. Green is good and red is we need work. But I bring this up just because one of the things in California that's worked really well is just getting in and rolling our shirt sleeves up and trying to solve problems actively with the industry. And this is one example of it. And so with that, I'll stop. Sorry for my technical difficulties, and but definitely excited for the discussion and to keep learning. Oh, actually, I did want to make, you know, one other thing in terms of the, you know, what we can get out of this. I think, you know, we're very excited to learn more about the smart procurement and as far as building out that network from the Netherlands. And in the Netherlands, we'd love to get you guys, you know, a ZEV mandate. In China, we have a lot to learn from China too. So thank you very much.
Are you, can you unmute, Gerben?
Yeah, Walter. So I'm on mute. So let's thank Tyson first for his presentation. I think he's still there, right? Yeah. Yeah, so I'm not sure there's questions. Otherwise, I would like to ask you one before we move on, Tyson. Could you say something about the role of public-private partnership in how you achieve this and how you might lure the companies into investing more in California?
Yeah, so I think, you know, looking at, as far as the public, we've had a lot of examples that really work well. The PEV Collaborative, we brought, you know, all those stakeholders together, and Jenny's on the phone here. We also have Veloz, which is really exciting as far as the you know, public awareness campaign, and then the California Fuel Cell Partnership. You know, they all have those components. You know, the government, industry, academia. We wouldn't be where we are without the three of those groups in particular. And then, you know, looking forward, it's kind of, we're looking at expanding. Okay, how do we create a whole ecosystem where everybody feels a part of it? And that's kind of the big challenge, right? Because I think now we're trying to get to even more scale. So those groups still incredibly important role, but part of a larger ecosystem is kind of how we're thinking about it, and part of the framework for market development.
Yeah, great for your explanation there. I think that indeed for scaling up, we really is essential to have businesses and government working together. So I see no more questions for the moment. So I hope everyone is preparing for them, keeping their questions for the Q&A later on. And as we do with our three-party cooperation after the Dutch perspective and the Californian one, we do have to really ask, what is China doing and how do they look at it? So I'm very happy to have here Yunxi Wang, who is director of the China Institute for Transportation at UC Davis, and we work with him in the ZEV Policy Lab a lot. So Yunxi, could you tell us something about the China perspective?
First of all, thanks for the previous two presentations, very good presentations. The comparison between among the three territories, wonderful. And I think you can see that California has the investment from the largest EV maker from China, and China has the largest EV maker from California, Tesla. And both companies, I think, they have their European headquarters in the Netherlands. If I'm wrong, please tell me, but I believe that they're in the Netherlands. So we three economies are really interacted and intertwined with each other. So let me briefly talk about what the situation in China. The Chinese EV sales went down a little bit last year and went dramatically down in the first 5 months. I don't know if I can do the, okay, so the first 5 months, it's still down. The red, that's, you know, total auto sales, passenger cars, and new energy vehicles, they're all down. But in May, the total market is up, passenger car is up, but EV sales is still down. BYD has been busy making face masks. They send me a lot of face masks as well. So so the Chinese requirement followed from the California ZEV mandate is that the goal at the beginning of the year was 25% by 2025, the market share. So, but the ZEV requirement, the dotted line above would not be able to carry the waters. So for the EV sales to grow, you will have to grow at 35% per year rapidly. There is a discussion right now, I think it will probably come to true, is that they will lower the goal target by 2025 to 20%. So I think it's very important right now for California and the Netherlands to work closely with China, that to help the people inside China who want more electrification to really share the goals and inspirations. Even with the Chinese original goal of 25% by 2025, it's still far from China's pledge to reach carbon peaking by 2035. So this chart basically shows all the different technologies. ICEVs will be going down. HEVs will be growing quite fast at first, the yellow line. EVs, BEVs, and PHEVs, these are all the combinations. So you can see that it's a long way to go. So I believe that the three economies should really work very closely, and the low-hanging fruit is freight and commercial trucks. So China has a big ambition, California has set its goal, and the Netherlands obviously has its goal. So I think we can work together, and probably we can start with some coordinated ambition together in the commercial vehicle sector, which would be easier for China to make such a pledge. So that's my comment. Back to you, Urban. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yunxi. Before I give the word to Gerben, maybe it's good to see. I didn't see any questions now, so they probably will be coming later then as well. We have a nice group now, all together in this Zoom. So I would like then to switch to the next part of our webinar this morning, and that's a discussion and specialist perspective and Q&A session on a couple of topics. So we have 4 speakers whom Gerben will introduce in a minute, but the 4 topics will be zero emission freight vehicles, bidirectional charging, hydrogen and green ports, and the EVS 34 outlook to next year. So please, Gerben, please take the floor, and we all are interested to hear from the different speakers, and I'm sure that each speaker's statement will create some questions among the public. So please take the floor, Gerben. Thanks.
Thank you again, Walter. And indeed, we're moving on to more discussion now. And I really hope that people that joined us from companies will take the floor as well and give your thoughts, perspective, questions. And as Walter said, we are grouping them around the 3 or 4 teams similar to the presentation of APPM. And I would like to start with zero emission freight vehicles. And I'm very happy to have also actually the slide can go up. So what we did is to put a little bit statement that hopefully triggers some discussion from you all. So car manufacturers should respond faster to market demand for zero emission freight vehicles. And I'm very happy to have Sita Holzlach here on the call, and she will give her perspective after we have some discussion and questions, hopefully. And she is, it's no coincidence I ask her, because I know she has been very busy with the Transport Decarbonization Alliance and the community of interest on zero emission freight to work together with California, CalStart, and other communities, businesses, and government around the world to look at the zero emission freight vehicles and to actually gather demand. So in a quite short time, there was over 100,000 confirmed orders. And this she took basically to OEMs and say, hey guys, the demand is there. When are you producing? And we will hear in a minute, I'm sure, on what the results of those discussions are. So I saw a few people: Paul Nijssen, Harm Weke, Stefan van der Wal, Nienke Dane, Monique Duinen, Alaska Kansha, Greg Bell, Alana Sanchez, Alex one that I'm not familiar with. So I'm very curious to hear some of you might want to give their perspectives on zero emission freight. Who can I give the floor? You can unmute yourself. Please do. Don't be shy.
Gerben, you mentioned my. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep. Harm Weke, hi.
Yeah. Hey, you mentioned my name. I think you know me quite well from another project on the zero emission freight. What we're doing now, and together with CalStart for the ZEV Alliance. And perspective is very brief. We see that it's coming up. We see that the vehicle manufacturers are slowly, very slowly coming on the market with their trucks. All the projects we're working on, so are mainly with the conversion companies. We would have hoped, but that by now we would have seen more OEMs with ready available vehicles with the right pricing, right capabilities. But it's still quite difficult. We see, so we were all waiting for the Tesla semi, of course. Maybe that will shake up the market a little bit. It's the next field. I think yesterday there was at the roadmap webinars a nice presentation about the bottlenecks, and a part, of course, the trucks that are not yet completely available in the right ranges. Like I said, they're coming more and more on the market. It's mainly also the complexity of the charging infrastructure. And for a lot of companies, it's not a common business every day to do that. Transport companies, but it's doable. It's all possible. There was an excellent example of the Southern Californian Edison, I believe, about how they are realizing the charging infrastructure in California. I think that's something where we in Europe, in the Netherlands, can learn quite a bit from. That the energy companies take the lead there, because we can tell from our project that it's extremely difficult for transport companies to understand how to realize larger transformers, the right charging infrastructure, the cost of the yearly grid cost, all those things.
Oh, I think Harm left us. Let's see. Maybe I saw somebody else. Yeah, Sita, please go ahead.
Maybe in the meantime, it would be good to maybe elaborate a bit on the. Thank you, Gerben, for the great introduction. Is it okay if I elaborate a little bit on what we're doing and some specifics within that? And then I have a couple of questions that I was wondering if I could ask to the group and see what the response was. Is that okay for you? Yep. Okay. So as Gerben said, we from the Transport Decarbonization Alliance, we are co-chairing this initiative together with CalStart Drive to Zero and EV100, where we are specifically focusing on that, that puzzle piece of the available vehicles for freight. And as Herman just mentioned, I think we were all hoping or expecting that there would be more vehicles available on the market by now, in larger quantities with better pricing. And and kind of references, but that's not the case. And there's several reasons for that. And to really dive a bit deeper into that discussion, we have started this series of events. So the launch was last May, or yeah, a couple of weeks ago in May. And we're going to do a couple of regional events as well to see what is the local demand and what is the local supply and what is, you know, the ecosystem that needs to support that and feed into that. And charging infrastructure is one of them. Policies is also one of them. And I was very happy to see in Yunshi's presentation that it's the low-hanging fruit. So, you know, my job should be super easy, I think, in that case. But we do see that, you know, I think collaboration between these sectors is something that's very important, but maybe also some more attention to freight, because freight is often overlooked within the discussion. And I think that's looking like it's looking like it's changing a bit. And we've collected kind of the learnings from that, the challenges, the possibilities. But since we're, you know, in this open meeting, I would really like to hear from you what you think, from your perspective as, you know, a company or another stakeholder, is the main challenge that we have to overcome to, you know, to get these medium and heavy duty vehicles on the market within the next, you know, 5 years or so. So in the medium to short to medium term, what is the biggest challenge that you see on this topic that we could, you know, feed into this discussion? And I don't know if Herman is back online, but I'm sure he has an opinion on that one.
I don't see Harm yet. I did see before Akasha Kaur, if I say the name right, wave her hand, I think. So maybe she would like to respond.
Good morning. My name is Akasha Kaur-Khalsa. I work at the California Energy Commission. Can you hear me okay?
The volume is a bit low, but maybe that's just me.
Sorry. In terms of the question of what is the public-private relationship, I can say that government can have an effect on the supply by having competitive offer of grants or loans or even tax waivers for companies that are out there at the edge risking their resources in developing new things to sell, new vehicles or new chargers. And that's my answer to what we can do for the public-private relationship.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I think California, especially with the ZEV mandate, is a big inspiration, and I think should be an inspiration for what's going on in Europe, for example, within that. And now that we have you here, do you know a bit of the specifics, like what the process was like to get to that ZEV mandate? Because I can imagine there was a lot of forces, you know, push and pull for either direction. Is that something you have insight in?
I think you should ask Tyson about the forces. I am a low-level government person, and I see that there is a unified goal from the leadership down through management to the people that get the money out. And it takes the visionaries convincing the legislature, and the legislature helping us have money. We do have to get a supply of money to give it out, and our supply comes from the license plate on every vehicle. We have about 40 million people and 17 million vehicles, and we gather up a fund of money to invest in making transportation clean the air better.
So also passenger vehicles are feeding into that fund then?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Because in the Netherlands, correct me if I'm wrong, Gerben, they're looking at using the toll being paid by freight trucks to reinvest in greenifying freight. But that's interesting to hear that in California also passenger vehicles are, the funds from that are being used to greenify freight. That's interesting. And would you say it started with the vision and getting a communal goal in that sense?
Yes, our leadership by the sequence of governors from all political parties have seen that our public health is affected by the poor air quality, and our environment would be better to have transportation pollute the air less.
Yeah, that's a narrative as well, and a framing kind of the topic that I don't know, Else, you're also on the line, but that I think we could learn from in Europe. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Cisa and Akasha, also with here from the Netherlands, from the ministry. I'm quite intrigued by what you say, because I think it all starts with a vision. We started with the vision in 2015 for decarbonization, our transport system. And I think what you just mentioned earlier on, Akasha, is you said that on an effective PPS, the government's role would now be to give loans, tax waivers, so you actually as a government can also de-risk those front runners in the financial risks that they run. So as a government, your classic role of just making sure that there is a ZEV mandate to some extent. We've got, of course, the European standard system, the CO2 measurements. But I think also that that force that we have, or that power that we have to de-risk with special subsidies, special loans, tax waivers, that is also a tool in the government's toolbox that we should not forget. So I think that's very good that you mentioned that here, and that's not always what we do actively, so to speak. So that's a really good one.
And what do you think of the framing within public health? Because I think in at least in the Netherlands and in many European countries, I think the focal point is still decarbonization, which is something sometimes a bit, far away for individuals that aren't, especially, in our bubble, and we get excited about it, but maybe others not as much. And public health is something very essential, and I see California using that in their narrative.
Yeah, I think what is so essential, and I think we've lost that a little bit in the Netherlands currently, but in 2015, when we started out with our sustainable transport vision, the sustainable fuel transport vision, we embraced not just the climate goals, but we also specifically looked at reducing the air quality of air, of course, reducing air pollution, but also noise reduction, also energy security, security of supply, and health. I think we have to understand that for a lot of different actors in our bubble that we're trying to achieve, for cities, the air quality is crucial. So we found when we started out with innovative public transport buses, the cities would come in 8 years ago, not because they had specifically a CO2 problem, but because they wanted to solve their air quality problems. And decarbonization gives you all of that. It is essential that governments like ours make it very clear in our vision that it's not just the CO2 reduction. And currently, of course, with the climate agreement that we have in the Netherlands, our work seems to have just the one hinge. And of course, climate is very, very important. But I think we've lost a little bit of that integrated goals, that goals that we achieve in a wider range, also in the field of energy and renewable energy. And I think if we don't grasp that to the full extent, that then we achieve above ground the most promising zero emission vehicles in all segments. But if below the ground, the energy system does not become renewable in the same lineup, the same time scale that we really need it, then we're stuck. Then we've got another threshold on our way. So I think an integrated vision, both on sustainable transport and sustainable energy, is absolutely key. And public health also makes public awareness and public acceptance for these new vehicles also important. I think we said earlier on.
I think that's really useful to put it in a broader perspective, right? It's not only a climate task, but also health. And I think you make a nice bridge to the infrastructure, charging infrastructure linked with the energy system. But before I move to that next topic, maybe Sita, could you just give us very quickly how we can follow up with zero emission freight and the community of interest, if any of the people here attending want to know more?
Yes, thank you. So feel free to email me and share my email address, Gerben, with the rest of the group. One very kind of simple low threshold way would be to sign up to the TDA newsletter. So that will be coming out every couple of weeks, where we'll share an update of the different tracks that we're working on. One of the projects is specifically on zero emission zones for freight. So we're seeing a lot of zero emission zones being announced in 2030, and freight within that is sometimes overlooked. So we're currently working with C40 and Polis on that specific topic. And we've also had a series of webinars on that. So that might be interesting. And the other one, I think, is the one we talked about a little bit already, where we're looking to see, how can we really accelerate this market for these kinds of vehicles in the next, 5 years, because that's when we need them.
Thanks, Sita. And I really recommend to contact Sita and join the community of interest.
It is my weekend in a couple of minutes, so I'll respond next week.
Hey, I think we still have three topics to discuss. I would really like to move on, and the next one is about the energy system and the linking with charging. Because if you want to do that effectively, it has to be both directions. So not only taking energy from the grid, but also delivering back. And we just showed yesterday in another meeting the opening of the first smart grid charging square in the Netherlands. But today we have a little bit different statement, just looking at public-private partnerships. And in the next slide, Peter van Deventer, this one. I'm very happy, Peter, that you are on the call, because you are not only director of the public-private partnership of California and the Netherlands, but you are also the one initiating the Living Lab in UC Davis. So I think to speed up a bit, I would suggest that you just give your reflections, and if we get any questions, please put them in the chat, because I think we should limit this one to 5 minutes to give still some time for Anna and Els to round up. Peter.
Well, that's quite a push, 5 minutes, right? No, so if the goal is carbon neutral energy economy in a few decades, a lot needs to happen. So if you look at the energy palette, it's about charging, or it's about generation, it's about storage, it's about use of renewable energy, it's about smart grid and energy efficiency. So it's a complicated palette to make this happen. So another layer on top of that is any paradigm shift cannot go without all players involved. Governments cannot spend their way out of this. We know this in California, we know this in the Netherlands, and soon everybody will realize. So at the heart of EVs, of zero emission transportation, is charging. Whether we like it or not, it's typically seen as a role for public agencies to invest in it. But again, here, the role of public-private partnership, I think, is crucial. So if I look at the success, for instance, of the metropolitan region of Amsterdam, it would have not been so successful in procuring these massive amounts of charging infrastructure if it would not have had a close relationship between academic institutions, private partners, and governments, in this case, regional governments. So if you would go to the next level, which is bidirectional charging, which sort of will help in many areas that I just described, because it's about charging, it's about usage, it's even about smart grids. If you look at this particular case, this cannot just be governments spending a lot of money. No, this is all about a close partnership between all stakeholders involved. That's where you need to have dedicated public-private partnerships. That would be my contention, or that would be my proposal. This is especially important for those areas in the world that are leading the effort into getting more zero-emission transportation on their roads. So I would say what the Dutch have started just a few days ago, I believe it was, is very crucial. And I would love to bring that technology to the Smart Charging Living Lab. You rightly said so. We started this 2 years ago at UC Davis. This was also, again, a close partnership between government, industry, and academia. I would say let's use that Smart Charging Living Lab to experiment with bidirectional charging and using it as a pilot project connected to the efforts in Culemborg.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, that would be great to do. So would be very happy if we can get someone that we haven't heard yet to ask a question related to the charging system. So I'm not sure that I saw that Greg has a question, but that's actually about the zero emission freight, Greg. So I'm not sure you can say something about the charging system. And otherwise,
Yes, hi, I'm in California. I'm in Palo Alto, California. Going back to my question on zero emission vehicles, electric trucks in city centers. I did a little research on how many electric trucks, light duty trucks for bread delivery and small items and so on, in many cities in Europe. And there are over 20 electric trucks available in Europe for sale. And in California and in the US, we don't have any. We have the biggest thing that is near a truck is the Chrysler Pacifica van. So the thought is, what's the status of banning these light delivery trucks within city centers? And that would improve our air quality tremendously. I'm not sure who to ask that to, but that's the big question.
So maybe Gerben, I'm not an expert on the North America at all, but I know, for example, that in Santa Monica, there's going to be a voluntary zero emission delivery zone implemented, I think within the next year or so. And they are talking to manufacturers to see, you know, when are you going to release these vehicles for the North American market? And a handy tool to kind of see what's coming up, you might know it already, but CalSTART has a zero emission technology inventory tool, and it's a very interactive tool that kind of shows, you know, which vehicles and which segments are available when in which markets. So they have the North American market, the European, and the Asian market already in their database, and they have daily contact with manufacturers to kind of update release dates on that. So, but I don't know if that's a satisfying answer you were looking for.
I see that because I know there. Yeah, I know. There are trucks available. Trucks can be available here, but U.S. manufacturers and others from around the world don't want to sell them because we don't have a policy in place that drives sales. So I know that there's a fee charged in many European cities if you enter with a high polluting vehicle. And if that policy was in place in the US and California, then it would drive sales because the economics of buying an electric truck would be easy because you would not be paying a fee every time you enter the city center. So it's not just the availability of the trucks, it would be the reason to buy them.
The policies and regulations and incentives. Yeah.
Policies. That's what we need.
For sure.
Kevin, may I add to that? Is that Greg, you say that this bans drive the sales. First, most of the bans are announced, so that's important. So not yet in place. And the other thing is that the actual availability in Europe is not so much different from the US. So it might look from a perspective, from looking overseas, that the market is different, but the most of the vehicles from the truck manufacturers are very limited available. They are coming up with the market, like I said before, but they are not very proactive sold. Let's put it like this. Some are in pilots and proto series. What you see in some European countries very interesting is like with the toll fees, like in Switzerland, you can see that is driving the business case. So you see differences, but like Sita already mentioned, if you look into the ZEV tool of CalSTART, you'll see the European ones. I think by now, also the availability on paper is more or less the same in both continents. Different brands, different manufacturers. But for really judging the availability, I would invite you to come over to Europe to look at to buy them. But you can see that the conversions are very active in selling, but the truck manufacturers are slow still. And we have to push them a little bit so that they go quicker.
Thank you. Good that you are back. Thanks for your comment. Good that you are back. I would propose that Yunxi was wanting to say something, and after that I would like to move on to the next topic. So Yunxi.
I just want to say that in China, through the Defending Blue Sky plan, most of the major cities will have the green zone by the end of 2022. So all the trucks, delivery trucks and inner city, whatever vehicles get into these zones will have to be BEVs, covering most of the major cities. So this that's why I say this low-hanging fruit, because the government can regulate and you have local citizen support because of air quality reasons. So it will be easy. And maybe need a little bit of government support for the startups to build those trucks at the beginning, but they are profitable. Thank you.
Thanks, Yunxi. And it's no surprise that we keep discussing freight vehicles, I think, because that seems really the next stage after passenger cars. But we are warning you, because after that, we think that then it will be about even heavier vehicles and vessels. So we discovered in our last workshop in the Netherlands in October that we will need hydrogen in the future as well. In particular for heavier vessels like in ports. So this was a discussion we had with China that we might have to start looking at that, although it seems still far ahead, but it's never too early to look at it. So I'm very happy to have Anne de Velde, who is currently working as policy advisor for the ministry in the Netherlands on ports and on green ports specifically. But she also used to be the counselor at the Dutch embassy in China. We worked a lot together to get this tri-party cooperation working. So welcome, Anne. And the statement I have for discussion is green ports should invest in hydrogen infrastructure now. So although now everyone is looking at the heavy duty vehicles, don't forget about hydrogen and about vessels. So again, because of time, Anna, I would propose that you give maybe a first reflection or some background on the statement.
Sure.
We'll address questions. Anna.
Yes, thank you, Gerben, and welcome to everybody. Well, yeah, for ports to invest in hydrogen infrastructure, what we see now is that more and more ports have the desire actually to take control of their own destiny with regard to alternative fuels, instead of waiting until government or other institutions introduce rules and regulations with regard to zero emission fuels for maritime shipping. And when it comes to hydrogen infrastructure for shipping, this is actually quite a complex area. I think as the fuel for the future in the shipping sector has not been crystallized yet. So demand and supply will really be an issue, but still hydrogen can be used in so many other sectors outside the shipping sector. So especially for ports that also have industrial complexes on their areas, investing in hydrogen infrastructure would seem like a good choice. And then of course, coalitions are extremely important, because cooperation between leading international ports, for example, can provide the critical mass to realize change successfully. And it is also very essential to form coalitions that involve shipping lines, terminals, and energy providers, as alignment across the value chain will have the biggest impact, of course. And we see some initiatives where this is already happening. For example, you have the World Ports Climate Action Program, in which, among others, Rotterdam and also Los Angeles are involved. And these CEOs of these ports have also agreed to now facilitate the launch of pilot projects in 2021 on new sustainable low-carbon marine fuels in their ports, and that will directly benefit deep sea and ocean-going vessels, I'm quite sure. So yeah, I believe from these kind of pilots and also from these kind of initiatives from ports, this whole network will slowly grow, and it will become more interesting for ports to really invest in hydrogen. That's as a start. Over to you, Gerben.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks. Yeah, and I can't help that I would like to nudge maybe some people that we haven't heard yet. So I'm personally quite interested to hear from either Alana or Alex or Nienke or Paul.
Yeah, I've got a question actually.
Yeah.
So I'll turn on my camera. Hi. So I've got a little boy watching us over there. Sorry about that. So that's the nice thing of working at home. So go. I've got a question for Anne, because I was in the webinar about the Hydrogen Valley in the northern part of the Netherlands, where they are doing the pilot. And how is the cooperation there with all the other ports in the Netherlands, and especially for Amsterdam and Rotterdam, which are the biggest ports in the Netherlands? What do you think, when will they benefit from the ideas which are being developed now in the northern part of the Netherlands?
Well, I have to say, I don't know exactly.
Okay.
I'm sorry. No, I just don't know what is exactly the stage at this moment of this. But what we do see is that all the ports actually have initiatives on this, on hydrogen, and you see so much. I think Else can also elaborate on that. But there is so much initiative now, and so much budget also. You know. Yeah, more and more budget coming. Also, we have the hydrogen strategy from the German government, which was only released last week, and which also we heard is, you know, a hydrogen strategy on in general, but they really have to have also earmarked a certain part of this budget, especially for shipping, because shipping is now becoming, you know, pressurized really hard to become decrease carbon greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a big push, you know, to really come up with alternatives for the shipping sector, and hydrogen is really one of the biggest alternatives here. Yeah.
But there could be others.
But there could be others. Yeah. Yes, definitely.
Yeah, and Anne, if I can follow up a little bit on that, and I'll try to stay brief. We've got more information on Groningen, because we're also partaking in part of the co-financing programs together with European money there. And what we're trying to achieve also in Groningen is to get the sustainable energy system right, because there's a lot of wind power coming into Groningen, and from that we actually, through electrolysis, we generate hydrogen, and that feeds into buses in Groningen, that feeds into vehicles, it feeds into tank stations, and for the port becomes it is a new energy carrier in ports. And you can also envisage that for some ports, the production, for instance, in Rotterdam, we've got a lot of refineries. If we want to take them to the next level, they will use hydrogen in the production of new synthetic fuels. And that's where Germany's angle really is also. So we're aiming through Groningen as a sort of nucleus to grow together with Amsterdam, Rotterdam, and to see if we can make a connection up with Antwerp, and to have much more, another bigger pilot in the northwestern region of Europe. Because it is an international segment. As shipping, we need to create an international level playing field if we want to achieve a transition for that transport mode. That is essential. It's key to look at each transport mode individually. What are the requirements? What are the players? What are the stakeholders? To connect that chain of total stakeholders up to that specific segment. I think that is the key, that could be the key of a success of any PPP that we do in order to make sustainable transportation work. But we can give you some more information on Groningen specifically if that is wanted or required. We've got the data in that.
Yeah, thanks, Els. And before we move on, I'm almost we're at the end of the time. So Anne, very quickly, what would you suggest for further information on green ports and hydrogen? Shall we leave it at the ministry in general, and in Els and your and mine hands?
I think that will not be enough, Gerben. We need much more people to participate in this network. But yeah, if you are at all as an audience, I don't know the exact audience, but if you're at all interested, you know, just get in, yeah, contact me, and we'll see how we can slowly grow this group. And I think especially also to get Asia more involved in ports would be very interesting, because for now the coalition is really, you know, European, Northwestern, United States, and not that much on Asia yet. While I think there's so much to gain there because so much going on there. Yeah.
Thanks, Anne. Yeah, and I think I fully agree, and we will look at doing that. There's one more thing to mention, maybe, that is that Rotterdam and the Port of Rotterdam have a lot of ambitions to be a green port, and they also offer to organize the EVS in 2025. So that hasn't been fully made official, but they definitely have that ambition. But that's in 2025. So we'll first look at next year's EVS, which no surprise or is in Shanghai, or actually it's called Nanjing. Well, for us it's about the same region, but it's still 300-400 kilometers apart. So Els, you have been talking already, but as you are the international coordinator for our Ministry for Smart and Green Mobility, we started 2 years ago with this cooperation in Shanghai, and we're going back there next year. So to you to round off and give us a little bit more insight on maybe your plans or what you're expecting from EVS 34 next year in Nanjing in China.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gerben, and thank you all very much for contributing to this webinar. Through the various speeches and presentations that we heard, there were all these key factors given by you about PPS. What works? Why have we made those graphs go up? Where does the uptake come from? And it comes from working together. And I think Peter, but Junshi and others of you also said so. We need to work together with central governments, with decentral authorities, with cities, with local communities, with business, with academia. It's creating that eco bubble, that ecosystem of cooperation, and having a focus. I think what Peter said, I feel very, very strongly also about that, having worked in the field of sustainable mobility now for almost a decade. Started out on a pilot innovation project on buses in the Netherlands, and 8 years later we now have achieved, we're on the target to achieving 5,000 zero-emission buses in the Netherlands in 2025. And we started with a BYD bus. We had a disruptor. So in order to get this whole system to work, you need all those levels. You need to have a focus. So I think the focus areas that came by in the slides, like for heavy duty, it's a different market than buses. Heavy duty works 24/7. It's a logistic chain that drives that heavy duty market. So you have to get partners on board from that chain as well, from the logistics side. For ports, there's another different dynamics that works there. So the key of a PPS success could be in having a good focus area, like with the Smart Charging Living Lab. Why does that work? Because all the partners doing something also on that energy side of the system are in that partnership. So I would think it would be absolutely brilliant if we could go back, Gerben, 2 years after we started on the multilateral cooperation for China in Shanghai, do a circular, the circle is round, and to say, the PPS works, and this is specifically why it works, and with these key areas. And then hopefully we can introduce this new PPS around heavy duty or around ports. And I think Shanghai would be brilliant if we could do it around ports. To start off that cooperation on that level at EVS 34. So that's all from me at this moment, and hopefully with the PPS guys, we achieve the scale up that we want. We're coming from a long way, and I think the past decade has shown that we can get OEM markets for passenger vehicles, and now we just have to drive that heavy duty and also the other transport markets, and we can achieve it by creating scale together. That's something that we should not forget. If we all start asking for these products, then OEMs will deliver at the end of the day. And governments will just have to set strict targets, and we have to do all the other stuff as well, de-risk and work together, but work together closely and in sync, in time, and also with the energy providers, I think. So that's for me, Gerben, as a wrap-up of a really broad discussion throughout the topics. Thank you all very much. And of course, we look very forward to meeting up either in person at EVS or on webinars. We'll just have to stay safe. That's most important, and scale up together. Gerben, to you.
Thank you, Els. And the very last word is to Walter.
Yes, I think we ran a bit over time. There's the fourth webinar, the final fourth webinar coming in 9 minutes, I see here. So I would like to thank everybody, the speakers, the participants. It was very interactive. I think this is a good lesson. This Zoom, let's say the standard Zoom session is quite interactive. I would certainly like to thank the guests from California, from the California government, all the guests from California, the guests from Netherlands and Netherlands government and companies. And thanks to Gerben as well, obviously. And yeah, and the only thing I can say, please, to the participants, at 10:30 Pacific time, San Francisco time, 7:30 Netherlands time, there is the closing session, and we're going to do an evaluation as well of the first virtual mission. So this was indeed the first virtual mission. We got a lot of attention from different areas, also from the Netherlands. So there's a lot of people who want to learn from us, because I think these missions will be more happening in the future. So thanks very much for this very engaging session, and speak to you soon.